and increased satisfaction that people derive from their spirituality. This meant that the metric by which we measured today's debate was the greater good of those individuals that subscribe to the religion. Why is that? Two reasons. One, that these are the people who often adopt this narrative within their lives. And secondly, these are the people who are most benefited or harmed in their perception of these hardships. We think the side that was best able to prove that won today's debate. We have done that so far. So proud to propose. 2 points of clarification before I move into some major points of rebuttal. Firstly, we get this idea from the OO that we fail to get meaning on our side because people don't associate like hardships around them with a sense of purpose. We refute that. We think we still can get a sense of meaning on our side, i.e. incentives to do good and to continue and to subscribe to that religion. Why is that? Because we think that the religion in and of itself is so much wider than the hardships that people face. It's not like, it's stuff like whether you go to heaven or not, what your afterlife looks like, the satisfaction that you derive from having a community that shares those beliefs with you. We think that there's a sense of meaning that goes beyond the events that define your life and to the sense of community and meaning that you get from interacting with the text and with people within that religion. We think it's following commandments to live a more fulfilled life. And even more so when you have pastors motivating you and telling you that yes, a hardship has happened, but that has nothing to do with your worth as a religious believer. But look here, there are other biblical figures who have got through hard times. You don't have to fulfill a test to get fulfillment and meaning out of a religion. We think you can still be motivated to get through hard times without associating it with a personal test that if you fail, you're not a good enough Christian or Muslim. Or if you pass, there might be another test along the line that will prove that you're not. So we think ultimately we can still get meaning because there's so much more to religion than just the test that you face. Second point of clarification. And the idea that, you don't see God as in control and you just see like life as like a point like of random events, and therefore you struggle to subscribe to that religion as a result. We think that people can still perceive that God has control over their lives and over these events, regardless of whether it is framed as a test or not, because you can still think that God did this for a reason, but the reason wasn't to test your faith. Like, for example, it could have to do with like you believing that this is a sign that like your Messiah is coming soon, and has nothing to do with a personal test that you have to pass. We think this shows you how you can still perceive and find reason and God in control of those events without it being seen as something that God has like made specifically for you, but rather as something that you can like learn from and can relate to, like, events that strengthen your religion as a result. So with those points of clarification out the way, I think it's important to look at a major clash that has come up so far from the OO, which is like, how do we internalize hardships and how does that change when we either abandon or like adopt this narrative? So we think that this is particularly important besides like directly engaging with what we've gotten from OO so far, but also like the idea that, we ultimately value people being able to reconcile with their faith and strengthen their facility to engage with God, right? And to the point that they doubt, right? That the specific lens through which they see hardship forces them to doubt, or they don't derive the same satisfaction, is something that we can regret. So the analysis under here is like, or we look at it on two levels, right? Firstly, how do people perceive hardships on our side, and how do they perceive hardships when you adopt like this narrative of like a test of God? So we think when people see something as a test of God, religious people perceive the quantity and also the difficulty of these tests as directly correlating to your worth as a religious follower, i.e., I'm experiencing these hardships because God is punishing me for a lack of spirituality. I have to pass this in order to prove that I am better, right? Opposition may say that this is what strengthens your faith. No, it is not. I'll take you at 5 minutes. No, it is not. Because when you continue to face those tests, despite the fact that you've passed them or you've not passed them, you begin to doubt your spirituality because you're asking yourself, why am I experiencing these tests more and more despite the fact that I thought I passed the last one, right? Or I'm getting more tests because I thought I passed it, but I must have failed it, because why else am I continually being tested by my faith? We think to that point, you begin to doubt your spirituality, which negatively affects your ability to still get satisfaction and also meaning from that. I'll take your POI.
Test from God about, I don't know, issues with my own finances or something to that effect, how would I know if I've passed or failed? What would God do to signify that for me?
Well, we think on your side, it's what I've just said, that the quantity and the frequency of which you get these tests is a direct correlation to how well you did in previous tests. So thinking, yes, okay, I passed this test. That means I won't get tests in a while because God doesn't need to test my spirituality. But to the point where you're getting more and more tests, whether that's with addiction or whether it's something you can't pass, we think that you directly link that with your worth as a religious person, right? Instead of something that it's a hardship that I have to face, yes, but I can get through it, not as something that I'm getting because my faith is weak and I don't know what to do about that. So we think ultimately, when you perceive these as tests, whether you pass them or fail them, the fact that you correlate it with your worth means that you often more doubt that faith and negatively impacts that relationship. So we think in the instances where you pass these tests, it's still better that it's not perceived as this. One, because like we've said before, it increases insecurity within your relationship with God because you constantly fear that another test will come or that you won't be able to pass. And secondly, it's hard to wonder why wasn't it easier? So if God was with you the whole time and he intended this test to be with you, why are you struggling so much with it, right? Why not could you be like, Moses or Job, that have been composed and were able to get through it and without being significantly hurt or significantly struggling with it? Because we think that to the point that you begin to compare how you deal with tests directly against how other people deal with tests, increases your insecurities because you wonder why wasn't it easier for you to get through that. So we think at the end of the day, the lens through which you perceive hardships can be a test, it can be a metric to which you measure your worth as a religious follower. It is worse when you perceive these as tests. So proud to propose.
Welcome the deputy leader of opposition to close the debate for the opening half.
All right. Am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. So thank you very much. Apologies to religious folks on this space. I might be using some triggered words like probably the F word or some other derogative word, either to religious leaders or religious organization. I really don't mean any sort of intentional harm. It's just by the way of phrases and all that. So I really, really apologize for that. Yeah. POI is strictly in the chat space, but from my 5th minute, you can unmute and ask your POI, most likely closing government. I will take you. So please, Panel, kindly put my time on the chat space for them to see. I'll be keeping my personal timer on my screen. Okay. We are ready. Let's see how this goes. I just want to confirm if my time is okay. Cool. All right. Cool. Thanks. So guys, just take note. From 50 minutes, you can unmute. Mostly closing government, and then you shoot your POI. I'll take you out to you. Just don't badge on my speech. Okay. So starting my speech in. Am I cool to go, guys? Hello. Hello.
Yes. Ready when you are.
All right, cool. Thanks. Okay, so starting my speech in 3, 2, let's go. So after this tournament ends, the first thing that everyone will be expecting is the tab to be released, and almost everyone will jump on the tab to go and check their speaker score, how they fare well in this tournament. The reason why we are always anticipatory of tab release is because we want to use that particular metrics to measure whether we are getting better as speaker or we are beginning to become a shitty speaker. Why? Because there is prerogative for us to always develop at every point in time, whether the tournament is a big run tournament or probably is a large tournament or it is word in itself. The importance of this analogy is simple, that it is intrinsic in human nature to always use every human life experiences as a yardstick to test, one, their internal validation in terms of readiness for life challenges, but then two, their bragging rights within the social disparities, either within the religious institutions or within the political field or within the economic field in itself. Which means if this principle stands to be true, which is actually true, opening government cannot necessarily run all those particular arguments that says, oh, let's fuck that. Let's just go through life without necessarily seeing it as test. Life inherently is test in itself. That is why they are always careful of how they prep their shit, how they prep their speech, because they want to win this round in itself. Definitely because they want to break to semi-final. But I would definitely defeat that hope. Let's go to the major characterization of what opening government gave to you. Just two things. And that's the problem with them. That, oh, this test is quite disproportionate in nature, because it is not always everyone that is mostly given to the same experiences. And then secondly, oh, a lot of people may fail this text, and then they try to be sneaky by saying, okay, even if people pass this text in itself, it necessarily puts more fear on them to face other tests in life. I'll quickly demechanize that and then show you why we win this debate. Let's go to the world where they actually fail this test. Why is that good in itself? Notice that the idea of administering a test, either within the religious world or within the normal secular world in itself, is because you inherently want to validate all of the things that you have been taught before taking that particular test. And that is also how religious institutions also operate. That is why you hold weekly programs where you equip your members on things that they need to face through life. Two nuances here. Number one, it means that the religious leader in administering or preaching this sort of narrative don't just preach it for preaching's sake. They also preach it as a curriculum mechanisms in streamlining and also checking those things that they constantly teach these particular worshippers in themselves. So if they fail this test, there are two mechanisms here. Number one, that religious believers begin to question those things that their leaders taught them. Most in time, if they have actually fulfilled all of the things that the pastor inherently teach them. For example, if your pastor say, pay your tithe so that life will be well with you, and you know you're paying your tithe, but life is hard. Two things happens there. One, either you confirm whether that message in itself is true, or two, you confirm whether you are not internalizing all of those particular teachings inherently. What it does is that in a world where you know that there happens to be a lacuna one way or the other, humans intrinsically will use their rationality to either opt out of that oppressive religious system or find a better way of find a better way of internalizing those particular teachings in itself. This particular exclusive benefit shows you in a world even if they inherently fail. Let's go to the disproportionate nature of this particular test, which is PM's major problem. Notice, tests can never always be equal with all. Why? Because the intrinsic nature of human is that our differences and our response to the same life problems definitely makes us to face life in a different ways. That is why even within the religious world, right, you have different organogram of leadership, different organogram of labor divisions and all that, based on individuals' peculiar ability to perform those particular things inherently. That is why religion would not necessarily test you that you are naturally poor to become a billionaire overnight, because they fucking know that is quite impossible. But what they at least help, or what they at least expect of you, is for you to rise through that particular social structures and all of the dictates that religion is teaching you to at least marginally benefit and also progress from that lower level of life inherently. So even if it is disproportionate in nature, I have justified why that is best, because it necessarily allows us to internalize our progressive growth as religious leaders. Opening government will never break in this debate. Now, there is a nuance that closing half might necessarily want to talk about, and I will engage that particular nuance in this debate. Let's go. Notice that the debate says religious leaders should. The entire conversation you've had has never necessarily shown you why this in itself is something that religious leaders in themselves should do. And that is the first extension I'm going to be giving to you from my speech. Let's go to the first extension on the idea of checks and balance and accountability measure. The nature of religion currently is that there seems to be some sort of unholy matrimony. There seems to be some sort of unholy matrimony between political systems and religious organization. And closing government might actually want to say this, that in a world where you discontinue this sort of test, you allow for better accountability measures of calling out oppressive governmental system. Let me show you why that argument in itself is flawed. When you say that this text in itself does not exist, what you definitely do is that you remove this particular leader from their position, from their positionality as a banner through which the worshippers evaluate and then understand the principle that this particular religion preaches. Why is this true? One, because when you administer this test, you don't just tell them that this test is just for them. You also know as a religious leader that this test is also for you. So it is counterbalancing and checks balance between religious leaders and their worshippers alone. That is why we can always call out our leaders at a point where we notice some sort of holy matrimony between them and corrupt politicians in itself. In a world where you say, let them discontinue this particular test in itself, you cripple that means of accountability, which definitely allow religious leaders in themselves to frolic with these fucking politicians in itself. I take your POI now.
Okay, I agree. Tests don't have to be the same, but the capacity to solve a test correlates heavily with privilege. Why is salvation and spiritual enlightenment exclusively entitled for people who have the capacity to do it over people who don't?
Listen, when religion opens its gates to everyone, it said, let all come in and worship me. But religion also understand that in most instances, not everyone can easily fit into the promises that religion preaches. That is why, like, I just don't want to be preaching Bible here. It tells you that, oh, to some he has given them prophets, to some he has given them healers, and all those particular things. The way religion in itself is fashioned is that it recognizes the individuality of people to definitely fulfill their own particular obligation within the principle of what religion in itself preaches. When you say they should discontinue, there are two things you do here. One is that you cripple the core principles at which religion in itself can evaluate its own teaching principle. Notice I have told you that you cannot administer tests when you have not necessarily been teaching people on how to live their lives in itself. When you cripple that particular incentive, leaders, mostly religious leaders, now have enough opportunity and liberty to frolic with bad governmental systems whereby they preach wise and then they preach wise and then they behave vice. In our own side of the house, where you continuously preach this, not only do you sustain that religious principle, but you also allow for that check and balance systems that exist between religious followers and also their leaders. And then that mechanisms in itself better in our own side of the house, because we cannot fish out fake religion, we cannot fish out fake teachings, we cannot fish out inadequate leaders in themselves. That is even why you can necessarily change your coach at the point where you bring this room. Proud GLO.
We think that's because with that will come to the end of the video. After we call on the member of the start to the teams somehow. Here.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you.
So I'll be the member of government for this room. POI should be in the text space, and starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. God is all loving, God is all knowing, God is omnipotent. And that's why people opting into religion, because God does not segregate, just like how the world segregates. Which means that if that same God is testing me, and whether I become closer to him or whether he loves me, is whether or not I'm able to pass that test, then that questions the existence of God being all-knowing and God being all-loving in of itself. Because if he knows that I'm going to fail the test, why is he testing me? If he really loves me, why must he test me before he makes me become his beloved or makes me become spiritually close to him in of itself? That is the kind of debate we are going to have. We don't care about whether people have the capacity to pass the test or not, because this is a narrative debate. The debate wants us to question the narrative involved, not whether or not people are going to have the capacity to pass it or not. This is why closing half is most likely going to have the most reasonable debate, and opening half most likely not break from the debate. But what is this narrative itself look like? It looks like opening opposition tells you that people are already shackled in society, because society itself is a test, which means that for far too long, society has been shackled into constantly living in a world of uncertainties which come as a text. The only reason why religion was created as an institution was to create an escapism or an echo chamber that lets these people necessarily live away from these constant perpetual tests of life. So if open opposition concedes that religion or that life in of itself is constant testing of itself, we think religion must be exclusive, because the reason why religion as an institution was created was to create a form of echo chamber that segregates these people from the harsh realities of life. Insofar as we are able to prove that religion will be better, and the reason why people opt into religion will be better, when we remove this narrative from religion, it means that we win the debate. Notice that there is no dogma that says that this in of itself is a test, which means that it was a narrative that was created. We don't know who created this narrative. It is just being propagated. So Closing opposition cannot come and say that, oh, it's in the Bible, it's in the Quran. There's nothing like that. This is just a narrative. We are able to prove to you that without this narrative, religion will still be better and people will still opt into religion better on our side. Why do we think on the first principle we are going to stop these people? Because we think this is tantamount to double jeopardy. Because insofar as opening house and opening opposition concedes that the world outside religion of itself is constant test, which people are failing and people are passing and people are in a whole lot of dilemma in of itself. We think we have to maintain the sacrosanctity of religion in of itself to ensure that people get some form of escapism from these harsh realities of everything necessarily being a test. We think if we're able to create that in of itself, we most likely win the debate, and that's what we've created on our side. The second extension you're going to get from me is on why this in of itself thinks the superiority of the deity of the religion in of itself and how this trickles down to cripple the religion as a narrative. 4 pieces of extensive analysis under this umbrella of extension. 1, insofar as religion and most Abrahamic religions preach that their God is all loving and loves unconditionally, so the idea of agape love and all those stuff exists, it means that God does not categorize his love. What this extension means is that God does not need people to have certain form of prerequisites for him to love him or for them to come closer to him in of itself. If that is true, then insofar as we are able to say that you have to pass this test before you become spiritually closer to me, or you have to fail before, like all those stuff that open opposition preaches, it means that we are preaching a world where the deity's love of itself is being categorized. What this then means is that you set a premise that God's love is on the ability of people to pass this test or necessarily fail this test within those instances, anything that they will argue. It means that there is no exclusivity between the love of the world that exists now and the love of the deity or the supreme God, which they said. That begs the question on impact. It means that 1, you lose the intrinsic reason as to why people join religion, because now, after all, the deity's love is not exclusive. It's just like what exists within the world. It means that there is no need to join religion of itself. But secondly, insofar as God's love is not exclusive in of itself, it means that undermine the extent at which people are able to assess that level of epistemic people are able to access that form of unconditional love that exists within religion. The impacts are manifold. 1, people are most likely going to opt out of religion because just like how atheists and co are preaching of itself, your deity does not give us any exclusive benefit. But secondly, insofar as these guys have to go through extra tests within religion, then it means that there is no need to opt into the religion anyway. But then Dominic's silly preemption to this case is to say, oh, we think that people are going to opt into other religions. Other religions are also premised on this same ideology. And so if your God does not give us any benefit and all other religions are also preaching this narrative because it's a very widespread narrative, then it means that they are most likely not going to opt into any religions anyway. We think the impact means that not just one religion feels this impact on scale, but a lot of Abrahamic religions that depend on this narrative in of itself are going to be crippled because there is no exclusivity that exists. The extension we bring to you from closing government is to say that this narrative is actually tainting the actual reason why religion was created, the actual intricate, exclusive nature of the deity that binds the religion. That is to say, if this narrative is not clamped down and this narrative in of itself is not stopped by these religious leaders, then it means that we are going to hurt. But why is this narrative most likely going to have a widespread impact? Because there's an automatic believability that comes from these religious leaders. That is to say, a lot of people believe them within that instances. And so insofar as this narrative exists and people would not like to believe these things, they most likely would not opt into religion in the first place, because when they opt in, they're most likely going to coerce to believe these things anyways. It means that the impact on our side is one that questions the existing premise of religion and shows how the award hates religion. Dominic, shoot your POI.
I showed you within my speech that this test in itself allows us to select better leaders to sustain religious principles.
Yeah,
How does
that's
the
the
word came
point.
after that?
Like, you've never elected your pastor. I don't know any church that elects their pastor. You've never elected the Pope. You've never elected the bishop. You don't elect your imams. So how are you going to change them? You do not prove. Because the perception in religion is to say that these guys are ordained by God. And so at a point where you cannot prove how you are going to vote them out, you do not prove how you are going to change them. It's very, very assumptive on their side. And that's why they most likely do not win the debate on that front. They have no accountability on their side, insofar as people automatically believe them. It means opening house is out of the debate. Because this is a narrative debate. You have to look at how the narrative is pernicious and why we should stop these guys from preaching it. Here.
We thank that speaker for that fine speech. The member of opposition to start opposition's incident.
POIs in chat exclusively, by the way. Beginning in 3, 2, 1. The problem with the Gov bench at this point in the debate is that a lot of their arguments rely on things that would be completely unperceivable by your average individual being true. And that's the POI that we asked to open in government that I think was very flippantly engaged with. Like, I don't understand why, if I was dealing with a personal battle with things like, I don't know, addiction, or things like, I don't know, trying to continue to be on the good, righteous path with God, how I would ever know that I've come to fail these things. Right? Government bench tries to suggest that I would know that I failed these things because I would continue to have problems in my life, but that's clearly not the case, right? There's no reason to believe whatsoever that just because you have passed a test from God, that you would no longer have any issues in your life whatsoever, right? You can pass a test with God regarding a challenge that you've had, yet still have other difficulties in your life because that is the nature of existence. The problem with the government bench is that in a lot of instances, the harms that they are saying are going to accrue would never meaningfully accrue. I think, and this is one of the biggest benefits right off the top that this type of narrative is able to provide for people, is that it is incredibly useful at letting people improve on their own pace at a step-by-step level. Why is this true? This is true because I think that there's a lot of benefits that happen to people across their life, independent of what it is that they're going through that is negative. That is to say, you can be experiencing significant amounts of difficulty at work, yet still simultaneously be experiencing a lot of benefits in your own personal private relationships. I think, however, that in a lot of circumstances, people tend to disjoint to these two. They see them as separate from one another and having no relationship to one another. The reason why they tend to do this is because they want to compartmentalize their life. Oftentimes, when you are not engaged in religious communities, you compartmentalize these things because you try to say that everything is disjointed and simply a function of the amount of control that you are able to impose on your day-to-day life. We posit, however, that when you engage in tests of God, religious leaders are able to use these things and meld them together to say that sometimes, your struggles in one area were the necessary precursor to your benefits in other areas, and emphasize that those developments that you are going through are eventually going to be useful pathways for you to be able to challenge and meet the expectations of the things that you are currently struggling with. Why are they likely to do this? I think that they're likely to do this for a number of reasons. First of all, self-interest, right? A lot of characterizations by the government bench about how religious leaders are likely to work are frankly absurd, right? I think that religious leaders have an incentive to give comfort and knowledge and information to their practitioners, so that way they can give comfort to the people who they care about the most, right? I think that it is simply rational for these people to try to look at the bright side and use that as an encouragement. But note what happens on government side of the debate, right? When you don't use these tests of God as a framing device, in a lot of circumstances, what you're likely to do is just encourage people to fight their demons on their own, to deal with it on their own time. And I think that this is uniquely harmful. Why? Because it tends to isolate people and push them away from communities that they are a part of as a tool of trying to improve themselves. But in a lot of circumstances, self-improvement is contingent on being a part of wider communities that have a large amount of people with their own specialist information and knowledge that they can then pass down to you in order to help you. As well, just being a part of social communities is often very helpful because, it helps to be around others when you are yourself struggling. The thesis of this is as follows. Their side of the debate often leads people with poor advice and relies on characterizations that are often misguided about how religious institutions are likely to function. Where do we come in more directly by way of extension? So A big issue in the front half of this debate that CG, I think, buys into is this claim. It is just an inability to characterize why one thing occurring is more likely to occur than another. OG is correct. Some people might feel alienated as a result of this. Simultaneously, OO is correct. Some people will feel empowered as a result of this. This is almost inadjudicable for you, however, panel, because it is impossible for us to assess which one of these groups is more numerous, nor is it possible for us to assess which one of these groups is more important, at least by way of analysis that is provided in the front half. What we can provide to you explicitly, though, is the type of advice that religious leaders are able to provide for their practitioners, and why the type of advice that they're able to provide through our narrative is substantially is like better advice for their practitioners, and the value of having religious leaders give more effective advice. Because it means that we just control for more variables, right? We know what religious leaders are able to do. We know that if they have better advice, it means that on aggregate, everybody's results are likely to improve, which means that we have a better way of actually adjudicating impacts in this debate. Why is this claim true in the first place? I want to note the context that this debate exists in, right? If you are going to your religious leader for advice about problems you are having, you've probably tried to express these problems to other people in the past already and have struggled to be able to actually communicate that effectively. That's to say, you've probably gone to your friends, you've probably gone to your family, you've potentially gone to a therapist, and you've struggled to get the type of advice that you need to be able to help you to advance. Why? Because if you could have already gotten that advice, you probably would already be acting on it and already have formulated a plan to be able to go forward. So, in these circumstances, you already tried to get useful advice for yourself and failed to be able to get something that you find is particularly meaningful and helpful. So, the problem that exists here is that these are often last resorts for a whole host of people. Also, it is not 6 minutes, it is 5 minutes and 20 seconds. I don't know why timing is wrong in the chat. So, the problem that our side is able to identify is that this is often a last resort that people are going to when they are relatively desperate.
You are?
That we then are able to get better types of outcomes for individuals. I think that we're able to do so for a number of independent reasons. The first reason is because we are able to then have religious leaders who pull on historical context substantially better. Why? Because these religious leaders, when they're able to use tests of God as a framing device that have existed historically through religions, can then pull on niche stories and examples and use that to illustrate their points. Opening. Okay, I gave you
Sorry. Okay, so what I wanted to say.
No. I gave you 7 seconds. So, why is it that that's useful? The reason why it's useful is because in a lot of instances, the ability to help people when they are having these types of struggles and they turn to their religious leaders stems on your ability to give like stories of triumph and success that are based on the exact types of problems that these individuals are going through. When you're using tests of God, you're able to, for example, give timelines of when it is that you can try to get results. You can use examples of other people who have been able to get these types of successes. You can give clear benchmarks and comparisons to other types of benefits that are existing in your life. The reason why you're not able to do this on the government side of the debate is through the framework they gave you, right? If you're relying on telling people that the problems that exist in your life are a function of the randomness of the universe or a function of external political structures that exist outside of you, your ability as a religious leader to give them comfort is very minimal because you don't have the tools to be able to change those aspects about their own lives themselves. At the very least, if we are able to provide them the tools that God has been able to give to individuals to improve their lives, we can give them clear, meaningful, actionable things that do improve those lives. And they do improve your life, right? Because you are now able to be a part of social communities and teachings and healthy habits that often do correlate with improved conditions for average individuals, which we think on average gets you better results than their side is able to get. That's propose. Oppose.
I think that speaker for that fine speech. And so sorry for the time. My hand was supporting. So just press it. I am super sorry. We'll call on the government to end the debate for the government.
Sorry, please confirm that I'm audible.
Yes, we can't hear you.
Okay. So, in case of any POI, just unmute and ask POI. I'll try to take it if I can. My pronouns are she or her. And so with that, I'm going to start. Pardon?
Sorry. I just want to make a clarification. Are you sure you're supposed to be in room K2?
Yep.
All right. I'm ready when you are.
Okay. Okay, so 3, 2, 1. So, panel, the reason why I feel closing government is winning today is because we win on all the clashes that happened in the opening half, and also we've engaged in closing half. Why do we feel that we win? Because we think that at a point in time where we are interrogating a narrative that is perpetuated by religious leaders in these religious organizations, then we have to ask ourselves, what is the impact of this narrative in the religion itself and also to those followers who exist within that kind of spectrum? Why closing opposition is out of today's debate is because they come and talk about what religious leaders can do, and this debate is about why should they continue with this kind of narrative, because we understand already that religious leaders are people who can advise their followers. Even in a world where this narrative doesn't exist, it still means that these religious leaders will always be looked up to by their followers for advice to engage or for actually give them a doctrine or help them understand better the doctrines that exist within that kind of religion. So even if you were to consider closing opposition in today's debate, they still don't show us how this kind of narrative or how this world is exclusive to theirs only. They talk about how actually individuals should be able to actually improve at their own pace. Now, we fail to understand how then does a test imposed on individuals, or how then does a situation where individuals are placed to feel like they are going through a test help them improve at their own pace? Because we feel like, according to how the member of government characterized to you, that already the world we live in today has a lot of different tests. If you're not suffering, for example, from a pandemic or any economic crisis, you're most likely trying to survive just because you're in poverty. At the end of the day, what you're looking for is to get a sense of hope and a sense of comfort, and this is why religion existed in the first place. We don't necessarily mean that at the end of the day you have to feel even worse when you're prejudiced by a religion that is supposed to be your safe space. It already incorporates in you another test that whatever you're going through is just for you to it's on the long run you're going to please a higher being, or on the long run your emotional strength and culpability is something that is going to be increased. We don't necessarily think that this is what followers are looking into when they're opting into religion. All they want is to escape all the problems that exist outside religion so that they can find their peace and their comfort within this kind of spectrum. All the opposition benches don't necessarily show us how this is achieved in the world, and that is why they lose. Secondly, closing opposition comes here with the idea that, these tests are very essential to give people like a timeline. Panel, you have to understand that at a point in time where individuals are already going through a lot, it doesn't necessarily mean that these tests have to exist so that they can have a timeline for their own struggles. We think this can also exist even when religious leaders don't have to get into this spectrum. People can still put a timeline on when they're supposed to accomplish whatever they are going through, or when they're supposed to get better in terms of all their struggles and everything. At the end of the day, timelines can still exist whether religious leaders engage in this narrative or not. Why then do we win on the clash of sustainability brought about by opening opposition? The problem with opening opposition is they come and say that, we really have to ensure the sustainability of this religion. Correct. But the mechanisms they use to support how this sustainability is attained is very questionable, because they talk about how actually we need to create the idea of perseverance, and the only way we can do this is when we have people buying into the idea that the sufferings they're going through is for a higher being. We think that this is very problematic, because at the end of the day, when we already interrogate as to why religion was formed in the first place, we tell you that one, religion was supposed to be a safe space for individuals, so that whenever you feel like the world is against you, you still have a place where you feel the unconditional love of the higher being or the most supreme being you subscribe to. At the end of the day, this is supposed to be like a form of escapism. The reason why most people are not necessarily going to opt into this kind of religion, where religious leaders are preaching about how suffering is like a good test of your emotional strength and culpability, is because one, individuals don't necessarily want to be overburdened with an already burdening situation. Individuals are not going to subscribe to something that is going to impose another responsibility to them, or a world where they actually have to feel like if they don't go through suffering, then they are not better beings, or if they don't go through suffering, then they are not at a much better position to serve their God or whichever kind of being. At the end of the day, religion is not going to be sustainable because most people will not opt into a suffrage of religion. The reason why even in these current times, most people have dubbed religion to be a place where people are suffering. If you look at Christianity, whenever you say that you're a Christian, people know that if you're not suffering in poverty, then maybe your life is just miserable. This is why most people opt out of religion, because they feel like already religion has been dubbed with this kind of identity that it's all
Sure.
about people who suffer. Most people don't opt into this kind of ideology when they're going through a lot. Secondly, any supreme being that exists within any kind of religion has already created the atmosphere that it's all about unconditional love. Whenever people feel rejected or neglected from the world, all they want to feel is the unconditional love of their supreme being. Why they're not going to opt into this world where they feel subjected to the same kind of reject or neglect that exists outside religion is because already it also creates like a second atmosphere for them, and this is something that most people don't want to look at. Panel, why we win on the I'll take you when it gets to fifth minute. Panel, another thing why we actually don't think OO is going to win in today's debate is because also they talk about how, suffering is something that makes people buy into this kind of ideology. Okay, I'll take your POI.
Panel, we showed to you within our speech that the internal and the external validation that comes with these particular people in either taking this particular text allowed them to improve on their religious teachings. There was no response like that to that particular argument till now.
The problem with opening opposition is they also assume that whenever people fail this test, they're going to have the incentive to call out on leaders to check into these kind of mechanisms that exist within this kind of religion. This is very problematic because when an individual fails a test, they will always look into why did they fail it, what should they correct. They're not necessarily going to look at who are the religious leaders, maybe they're the ones manipulating us into failing all this and that. We feel like this is very problematic because individuals, whenever they're subjected into this kind of tests, they will always be stagnative, looking into why they fail, or looking into the kind of test, or being bad, or looking into actually the reason why they failed, and not necessarily looking into changing these leaders. At the end of the day, you don't necessarily find followers who are actually going to question, because if they're already looking into the problems, or if they continuously have to look and assess that they have to go through problems so that they can be better followers, we don't necessarily think that they have the capacity to question out on their leaders. Panel, the reason why closing government wins is because we tell you that religion is much more likely going to be sustainable when people are not co-opted into struggles. Secondly, we win because we tell you that religion in the first place was created to be a form of escapism for people and not necessarily a bondage of suffrage for people. And thirdly, we tell you that religion itself was supposed to create this idea of unconditional love of God, and when we subject people to test, you don't show them that unconditional love, you show them that they have to prove how better they are so that for you to love them, something very problematic.
We think that's speak up for that. People on the opposition will lose the quarterfinal.
Okay, give me a second. Okay, POIs through chat, or maybe I should say in any moment of my speech, is there any POI? Then please be quick with your POI. Pronouns, masculine pronouns. I'll be taking my time. And I'll start in, give me a second. Three, 2, 1. I think it's very clear what my house achieved in this debate, which is very important. That is that throughout maintaining this narrative, we get much better people. By this, I mean that unlike the government side, we explain to you how it is thanks to this type of tests and religious leaders that we have people with better mentalities that allow them to solve their problems and solve them in a better way. We have people who have a better relationship with their God. I have some notes coming from OG and CE. First of all, OG. I have a big problem with the government's case and its lines of argument. I think your argument about how there are people with privilege who have money to be able to get out of these problems is false. It is false for two reasons. First of all, this will be totally symmetrical, wouldn't it? I think life would still be unfair on both sides of the house, because on your side you will still have rich people who take advantage of this situation to get out of how rich they are to get out of these problems. So you're not attacking my house or the narrative, but the reality itself. And as you can imagine, the debate isn't about this. You're not attacking my arguments. You're not attacking my case. You're just attacking something that exists in both sides of the house. But second of all, now knowing that these types of tests are not things that God assigned you like a video game mission, like buy a house if you're homeless style, we know that this type of tests are more directed towards this concept of that God gave you a problem that you can perfectly cope with, but it requires your dedication to do it. I have no reason to believe that the analysis coming from OG is that God will assign problems based on how rich or how poor you are. Like, that wouldn't make any kind of sense. But even if it did, I still respond to you like, that's not something that is bad with my kids. That's something that is bad in reality. That's something that's bad in society. So they cannot win this debate by saying that there's rich people in my side of the house. But another problem I have with the current case is your relationship with God. I think there's a big logical leap within this claim, and that is that they don't understand the nature of religions per se. To advocate that people are not going to want to do what they can to be better Christian, Muslims, or Jews in the eyes of their gods is basically saying they believe in nothing. I believe that the greatest goal of every religious follower is to be able to move closer and closer to the ideals of life of their gods. Therefore, I believe that the government cannot win this debate by saying that people have worse relationships with God when I have already explained that what these people are looking for is to improve this relationship, and if they have to face a problem to do so, they will do it. Also, I think the answer we received from OG about how God gives you tests is very funny. I think the government is making a big mistake in your case. Ethan explains that we think that you will perceive the good things that happen to you as advice that you are on the right path on your test. But I think the best answer to this claim is very simple, and it is that they say, for example, they say God assigns you tests based on how you did on the last. But we believe that's wrong. God assigns you tests based on how much you need them. It's very odd that the government's case is based on God not knowing how to test, and they have to change the whole context of the debate so they only work for their case. Now, passing to CG. Panel, I believe that the case of CG and OG are not at all different as they want to sell it to you. The CG case is just trying to say people will be less engaged in religion because they will find it unhelpful, because there is no clear reason for the test. Understanding that this is their case, I think they make the same mistake as OG, and that is that they fail to understand how religion itself works and how this test works. CG swears that religious followers are going to be all in this process, all alone in this process. That they know about this narrative because they do, but they don't. The motion and Ethan explain very well that there is a specific reason why we have these religious leaders teaching these narratives. Therefore, the followers are not alone in this process. To claim that these followers would not understand why God put them to a test or why they have to solve this test is to assume that these followers do not know the religion. CG cannot win this debate by saying people will not understand these tests. If we already have explained how they will understand them and how they will be accompanied during this process. I think another big problem with CG case is its characterization. I think it's totally false to say that religious leaders are going to come and tell you that you failed your test. Ethan explains to you that every religion has an incentive to preserve its followers and accompany them on their religious journey. No religious leader will have a reason to simply frustrate and abandon his followers. There is much more benefit in simply explaining that you did what you could, and that is what matters. Having a better relationship between leader and follower is much better religion. It will make you have a much better religion that is likely to attract many more followers. I believe that when you have leaders who give you better POS through chat, please. You have a better advice. They generate much more confidence, which ends up being much more useful. I think we have to emphasize on how important it is that Ethan explains you how we have a reason for inside of this debate to defend how religious leaders have to spread this narrative. When you have religious leaders who actually give better advices, who generate much more confidence, is when you are having people who actually understand this test, who actually pass this test because they are not alone, and therefore you attract more people to your church. You give more value to your church, and therefore you give more value to your religion. I don't think CG can win this debate saying that people will not understand these things if I already explain you how they will, and there will be a company within this process. But before that, is there any POI?
Yes,
So
POI
no
OG.
one can prove that.
Okay,
Can I
no one
continue?
said nothing. Okay, no one said nothing.
Right.
Okay, passing. Okay, sorry. Passing to things that I believe is very important inside of the debate is, I think there are three very important points which put us above OO. First one, this is the type of advice religious leaders are the best at giving. Second of all, explanation of how we create better people. Can you stop interrupting me? Can you stop interrupting me? Thank you. I think there's three very important points which put us above EE. First one, this is the type of advice religious leaders are the best at giving. Second of all, explanation of how we create better people who overcome their problems with more incentive and purpose. Third, responsiveness. I don't think they actually attack or respond to things. They just say their claims hoping they clash. I think we win this debate over OO and over OG and over CG because we actually prove you how we have better people, how we have better people who solve their problems, have better relationships with religious leaders and with God. I believe we are the only ones who actually prove you how staying with these narratives actually make this debate and this war even more, how they make these problems engage more with people. No, I don't think OO never explains this. They just clearly have ideas, but they never landed. That's where I think we differentiate with them. For this and more, proud of opposing.
For that final speech, without closely end of this round, all the political Abigael try to walk up to the platform and shake hands. Why judges should or need to demonstration so the thank you so much for the round. I can't try to shake hands. Judges, please let's move to the next one. Okay, to the pressure.